Science fiction.
With a whole new attitude.
Sci-Fi Entertainment, only on the Sci-Fi Channel. Coming up next.
We're heading back to Las Vegas this week to tour the town's best sci-fi and fantasy attractions.
Now your souls are mine!
I'll go behind the scenes of Armageddon, and we'll preview the next wave of summer sci-fi films.
Plus, summer vacation best bets, and Rod Serling's partner, Buck Houghton, recalls the genius behind The Twilight Zone. You've reached the center of the sci-fi entertainment galaxy. I'm Chase Masterson.
And I'm Scott Nance. Every week we start with the latest buzz, so let's get right to the Sci-Fi Wire.
Sony Pictures hopes you haven't had enough of the new Godzilla, because the studio is planning a Godzilla sequel just 2 years from now. But some theater owners may not be interested in running Godzilla 2. That's because Sony demanded a higher than normal share of the first week grosses for the current Godzilla. When it didn't perform as well as expected, theater owners didn't get their hands on much of Godzilla's revenue.
I was learning. Learning what? How to kill us.
The release of the long-awaited sci-fi thriller Virus is being pushed back again, maybe to as late as next year. Universal's already run full-page ads for the high-tech monster movie in magazines like Fangoria, touting its release next month. But the filmmakers still aren't happy with the special effects. The film was originally scheduled for release last year, so when the special effects are finally finished, they better be pretty darn special.
The truth is something you'll never guess, never have predicted.
The X-Files movie, Fight the Future, was a powerhouse at the box office last weekend. Scully and Mulder's big screen debut pulled in a whopping $31 million in its first 3 days. That's the fourth biggest opening of the year, behind Godzilla, Deep Impact, and The Truman Show. The X-Files also became the fourth biggest opening ever for its studio, 20th Century Fox. And if you want daily sci-fi news updates, check out the online Sci-Fi Wire. Just point your browser to www.scifi.com.
You know, speaking of the X-Files, I'm a rabid convention goer, and I just had to bring this video in. Now, there are X-Files fans, and there's X-Files fanatics. I categorize this woman as a fanatic. Can you believe this?
Oh, that had to hurt.
I wonder how many times she's seen the film so far. Well, with the X-Files, Godzilla, and Deep Impact already in theaters, and Armageddon on its way next week, the summer movie barrage has just started. Starting July 10th, Small Soldiers will be the first of the next wave to do battle at the box office. It's about a group of toy action figures that come to life to fight the monstrous Gorgonites.
Commando, Tin Pet!
The humans involved in the action include Interview with the Vampires' Kirsten Dunst and the late Phil Hartman. John Romita and Joe Dante called the shots, and Academy Award-winning creature maker Stan Winston made the toys.
If low-tech fantasy is more to your taste, watch for The Mask of Zorro on July 17th. This romantic fable stars Antonio Banderas as the swashbuckling Latin hero who defends the powerless and leaves a sword/Z to mark his turf. Catherine Zeta-Jones co-stars as Zorro's love interest, and Anthony Hopkins plays an aging former Zorro who passes on his secrets to Antonio. Expect some amazing horsemanship and lightning-fast swordplay.
Will you go out with me?
No.
Just scheduled for July 22nd is a new teen horror movie called Disturbing Behavior. Described as sort of the Stepford Wives Go to High School, Disturbing Behavior features a sexy young cast led by Dawson's Creek star Katie Holmes. On August 5th, the venerable Halloween series returns with a 20th anniversary installment, hence the subtitle H2O. And former Scream Queen Jamie Lee Curtis makes her first Halloween appearance since the second film back in 1981.
Then, on August 14th, get ready for The Avengers.
How now, brown cow?
Rafe Fiennes and Uma Thurman star as John Steed and Emma Peel in this ultra-hip, retro sci-fi adventure. Joining them is Sean Connery, who gets to ham it up as a villain with a killer weather machine.
You'll pay for that.
Looks like one hot summer in some cool theaters. There's more sci-fi entertainment on the way. We'll venture behind the scenes of Armageddon. And the producer of The Twilight Zone recalls the legendary Rod Serling. Approximately how many meteors strike Earth's atmosphere each year? Stay tuned. The answer may surprise you. About 50,000 meteors strike Earth's atmosphere each year and burn up with little consequence. An asteroid hasn't hit Earth in millions of years. By the way, there are 26 known asteroids larger than 200 kilometers in diameter.
The summer's most expensive and biggest action sci-fi film is Armageddon. But when I visited with the cast and crew, they weren't talking sci-fi. They were praising the toys.
NASA couldn't have been more generous with their time or with their big toys. Ben Affleck and I are apparently the only two civilians who are ever been allowed to go into one of those $10 million spacesuits that we wear in the neutral buoyancy tank, where they train the astronauts to go up into outer space.
More O2, Bear. I'm throttling up.
The neutral buoyancy tank at Johnson Space Center is 40 feet deep and gives the diver a sense of what it will be like in space at zero gravity.
We're going to start bringing them up now, which is...
No way. Leave me down here. Come on. Oh, man, is that it? Don't tell me it's over.
Cast and crew were also given access to other highly restricted NASA areas.
We spent a couple days working under and around a fully loaded space shuttle. I mean, it's right there, man. It's just strapped onto the tanks, and it's really exciting.
Away from the playground of NASA, Bruce and his co-stars continued living out their astronaut dreams on the giant asteroid set. Built on one of Hollywood's largest sound stages, production designer Michael White spent 4 months working with a 150-member crew to create this otherworldly set.
The asteroid is really another character in our film. It's the force of evil that's impending doom on mankind.
I don't know if you've been around when this thing starts to come alive. The floor starts shaking. These things are like plate tectonics. They start to move, cross over one another. We've had flames coming out of this, 25 feet in the air, green flames. Gets a little warm down here. It gets a little nuts.
For the astronauts to drill into the asteroid, Armageddon's production team designed this space vehicle called the Armadillo.
It moves about 35 miles an hour. It's got front and back wheels that turn to make it do very tight corners. What I went for was something that could look like the word armadillo. I wanted it to be kind of mean, macho looking.
Even the usual stoic NASA employees were impressed by the asteroid annihilator.
We saw 100 people standing staring at our armadillo, and these are gentlemen that send our astronauts into outer space and create all this amazing gadgetry and engines, and you know, they're geniuses, and yet they're looking at our little armadillo.
All right, flight directors, I want the go, no go for launch.
Real-life astronaut Joe Allen, who served as a consultant on the film, found himself fascinated with Armageddon's space shuttle.
It is a Cadillac version of the shuttle. It's bigger than life, and I wanted to talk to my NASA friends. I think we astronauts have been shortchanged a little bit. This thing is huge.
The spaceship set, I would go in and just fiddle around. All the buttons worked. It was like when I was a kid, I got the Starship Enterprise set as a toy. I used to have the Millennium Falcon as a kid. I love those kind of things to play with. And so this was like a big, you know, kind of toy. It's like you're having the biggest toys imaginable, you know?
Now that the film is finished, a lot of the Armageddon hardware we saw has been put into storage. Producer Jerry Bruckheimer told me that some of it, like the Armadillo, may be headed for display at Disney World in Florida. But starting July 1st, you can catch it all on the big screen when Armageddon opens.
Rod Serling, the force behind the classic Twilight Zone series, passed away 23 years ago this weekend. And though I never had the pleasure of meeting this remarkable man, we did get a chance to speak with someone who knew him best, his producing partner, Buck Houghton.
Yes, Mr. Wilson?
The Twilight Zone was one of the most celebrated TV series of the 60s. Now, 3 decades later, it's one of the popular classics on the Sci-Fi Channel.
This aeroplane is heading into an uncharted region, well off the beaten track of commercial travelers.
The genius of the Twilight Zone was the genius of its creator, the late Rod Serling. Most fans only know Serling as the intense man who hosted the series. But to Buck Houghton, Rod was a friend and a colleague. As producer of the Twilight Zone, Houghton worked more closely with Serling than anyone else.
He was always a guy with a very short span of attention, smoked an awful lot of cigarettes, which is, by the time it gets to the 3rd pack, it's a nervous gesture. It's not a need for tobacco.
Houghton remembers Serling as a creative dynamo, with ideas bursting out of him so fast that a typewriter only got in the way. So Serling dictated the show's scripts into a tape recorder.
Rod, with a tape, could do a script in 24 hours. And if he had to peck it out on a typewriter, it'd have been 2 days. And he was a very fast thinker, and therefore anything that sped up the process was to his advantage.
Rod was undoubtedly the most prolific writer in the history of primetime, churning out a staggering 90 out of 156 Twilight Zones. The stories often reflected a preoccupation with the horrors of war, the nuclear threat, and prejudice.
I took it off a Jap officer who tried to cut off my noggin. There's something engraved on it. Maybe you can translate it for me.
Sorry, I can't speak any language but English.
Houghton believes that, ironically, the same nervous temperament that drove Serling's prolific creativity also caused his premature death.
A guy that can't sit still for over 10 minutes has got something metabolically or neurologically speaking that's going to wear out. The smoking was a manifestation of that, too. I can imagine that would cause heart problems, which is indeed what he died of. There's too much tension constantly.
The rest of us will never know the man behind the craggy face and sinuous voice which introduced each Twilight Zone. But his extraordinary imagination will continue to intrigue and entertain us. Next up, we're heading back to Vegas for some moving, high-tech entertainment.
In the TV series Lost in Space, what was Maureen Robinson's scientific specialty? The answer right after this. Maureen Robinson's scientific specialty was biochemistry. The super space mom was played by June Lockhart, who celebrated her 73rd birthday on Thursday. Happy birthday, June.
On last week's show, we discovered that Las Vegas, of all places, is probably the biggest sci-fi and fantasy city on Earth.
But we didn't have time to show you all the attractions there.
So this week, we're taking you back for more. Fasten your seatbelts. Las Vegas has emerged as a vacation destination for fans of science fiction and fantasy. This is due to a recent explosion in themed attractions. Here are the ones that Scott and I liked, starting with the motion simulator rides.
Motion simulator rides combine film projected onto a wraparound screen with moving seats. And Vegas has become the motion simulator capital, with 4 casinos opening rides.
One of the newest simulators is Star Trek: The Experience at the Las Vegas Hilton. The voyage begins with a self-guided tour through a museum of Trek memorabilia. Next thing you know, you've been beamed up aboard this amazingly accurate recreation of the bridge from the USS Enterprise D from Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Ensign Thomas, get those people down to Shuttle Bay 2. I'm heading back to the bridge. Aye, sir. All right, everyone.
After receiving important mission instructions from Commander Riker, a turbolift takes you to a launch bay. There, you board a shuttlecraft, which is the motion simulator ride. Then, the wild odyssey through the Star Trek universe begins. Was it fun? Was it scary?
You didn't even realize you were in a simulator. You really thought you were on the ship going back to Earth.
Now, while I was enjoying my stay in Star Trek land, Scott was on a different adventure.
The Luxor Hotel Casino flaunts a motion simulator ride called In Search of the Obelisk, designed by legendary Hollywood visual effects artist Douglas Trumbull. Trumbull also created the Back to the Future ride at Universal Studios. He refined the techniques of that attraction in designing In Search of the Obelisk.
You can fool the human nervous system into thinking that you're moving.
or accelerating or decelerating or turning by giving you what's called onset cues, which is at the moment of the initiation of a turn or something, you move the vehicle in the right direction.
In Search of the Obelisk is a fantasy adventure, a high-speed chase through a mysterious underground pyramid. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Chase and I met up in Atlantis.
Caesar's Palace has joined the Vegas Arms Race for the biggest, most technologically advanced motion simulator ride with Caesar's Race for Atlantis.
Now your souls are mine!
Created by the IMAX Corporation, the ride is the most cutting edge of all motion simulators. For the first time ever, 3D imagery and 3D sound have been added to this kind of attraction.
These lenses here go on and off at about 24 or 48 frames per second. It's controlled by an infrared light, and it creates a very ghost-free and spectacular 3D imagery. Also, it's very hard to see, but there are also speakers in these glasses which give you the ability to create really unusual and spatial sound effects.
The ride is a high-speed chariot race through the legendary kingdom of Atlantis. The visuals reminded Scott and me of Fantasia.
And it was so beautiful. Atlantis is so beautiful.
After finishing Race for Atlantis, we marveled at the Atlantis show. It's located right next to the ride in the Forum Shops area of Caesars. A huge fountain comes to life featuring amazingly convincing robotic characters. The show tells the mythical story of the battle to rule Atlantis. The drama unfolds in a special effects extravaganza of fire, lasers, and animatronics.
But I really wanted to indulge myself in special effects, and I got the opportunity at the MGM Grand's stage spectacle, FX.
I'm coming to get you, baby!
The show, starring David Cassidy, rates as the first major production to combine elements of live theater with special effects technology from the film and theme park industries.
Tell us, how many special effects are involved in this production?
We have close to 100 pyrotechnic effects in the show alone. Then you start adding all the flaming gas, the liquid nitrogen, the fog wall, which is a special effect. You start looking into the transitions into the scenes are special effects. The illusions in the show that we used during the Houdini segment, we're just filled and packed with effects.
Performers soar across the stage on a flying saucer. Fire-breathing dragons come to life. And H.G. Wells' time machine carries David Cassidy into the future.
And we actually reproduce the whole time machine sequence with the Morlocks. We have a wonderful, incredible dance segment in that number of the show. We also have, when David finds Laura and he recaptures her, they fly away as the whole land of the Morlocks is disintegrating. Earthquakes, fire, flame, gas.
While the onstage production is eye-popping, the behind-the-scenes show is equally amazing. I visited the automation pit beneath the stage. There, the MGM Grand's entertainment project manager filled me in on the hazards of producing this technically complex show.
You could certainly trigger disaster from these consoles, probably more so than any other place in the theater. So the people really have to be sharp and direct on their screens and pay attention to the cues as called. Any delay in the cues could cause scenery crashing and endless accidents on stage.
The main thing Scott and I discovered from our trip is that Vegas is no longer just the gambler's mecca. From the fantasy and sci-fi themed hotels, restaurants, and casinos, to the shops specializing in Star Trek and Star Wars merchandise, to the fantastical simulator rides and stage spectacles, Las Vegas has become a playland of the imagination. Have you planned your summer vacation yet, Scott?
Are you kidding? With this job, it's like my whole life's a vacation.
Well, for the rest of you who don't want to work all summer, here are a couple of summer vacation ideas that are definitely sci-fi best bets. Are you into aliens? If so, Roswell, New Mexico is the place for you. After all, it's the only city in the world that can boast 2 UFO museums. And this year, UFO Encounter 98 marks the 51st anniversary of the alleged flying saucer crash that made national headlines. Though the museums are open year-round, July 2nd through 5th is when the whole town joins the action. This year's events include an alien expo, a lecture series, crash site tours, recreations, and costume contests. You can get more info by calling toll-free 1-888-ROSWELL.
If the desert's too hot for you, head up to Canada. From July 10th through August 9th, Montreal and Toronto will simultaneously host SciFiEnt9a 98. This may be the largest festival of fantasy, action, and horror in North America. And this year's festival will showcase over 75 action, horror, and sci-fi films from around the world. Premieres include the long-awaited Phantasm 4 Oblivion and Taylor's The Mummy, directed by Highlander creator Russell Mulcahy.
Seeing is believing.
For more info on SciFiEnt9a 98, call the hotline at 514-982-6555. That's all the sci-fi entertainment we can pack into this half hour.
But if you missed anything, you can find the highlights of this show online. Just point your web browser to www.scifi.com/entertainment.
We'll see you next time.
Produced in association with the Sci-Fi Channel.